Welcome everybody to our third DH tool refresher with the DH Center here at San Diego State University. My name is Pam Lach. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the DH librarian here, and I run our DH Center where I'm zooming from. As we've done in past tool refreshers and other DH events, I want to start by reading our land acknowledgement. And let me put the link to that in chat. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. And if you are joining us from a land that is not here on Kumeyaay land, I encourage you to share in the chat where you're zooming from. And while you're doing that, I'm going to put a link into chat. This link will take you to our tool refresher quick sheet, which is just a running set of links and resources for all of the tool refreshers we've been doing this semester. And as a reminder, we started with Timeline.js back in September, then moved to StoryMap.js in the beginning of October. And now we're moving out of the world of the Night Lab tools and into other tools that are good entry-level tools for getting started with some kind of data visualization. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at a tool called Onodo, which is this really fabulous tool that allows us to engage in what we call network visualization and network analysis. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of network analysis or network visualization? And you can just raise your, do an emoji or raise your hand. So a couple hands. Okay, cool. No, okay, awesome. Well, network analysis, or more broadly, network visualization, is a way that we can visually represent relationships between things, what we would call entities. And just about not very many things can be entities. So you can have people as entities, you can have events as entities, you can have ideas, you can have scholarship. So one of the first times I engaged with this tool was for helping students visualize their lit reviews in a history class, so what we call historiography. So they were actually visualizing how scholars were talking to each other and making arguments about historical evidence. So anything that sort of can fall under the entity can be visualized in relationship to something else. So what network visualization allows us to do is to see patterns in those relationships. And as with any other kind of data visualization, it's a starting place, right? It's not going to be self-evident. We're not going to just look at it and get all the answers, but it's a way to help us ask and answer research questions. It's a way for us to dig deeper into particular research questions and to maybe look for things that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. So before I launch into the tool, I want to show a couple of examples to help you visualize what I'm talking about. So the first is the very first visualization I created with this tool. And I should add that I had taken a data visualization class in library school, and we used very complex tools that I couldn't actually get to work. And what really excited me about this tool, Onodo, is that it was the first tool that I could actually use to create a pretty decent visualization. And so it felt like a really good tool as an entry level and a really good thing in the classroom. So I was working with a professor, actually Dr. Beth Pollard, who I've referenced in our other tool refreshers, on a class where students were working on the historiography of witchcraft. And so she wanted them to be able to visualize the historical arguments that scholars were having, the way that they were differently interpreting. Oh, I guess I should share my screen. That would help. Okay, sorry about that. I sometimes forget that I'm not sharing. Can you see the visualization? Awesome, thank you. So what she wanted them to do was to read how historians were talking about a particular experience of witchcraft, whether globally or in the United States or colonial, what is now the United States. and to be able to map or sort of visualize how they were speaking to each other. So I created this visualization on a similar topic of witchcraft, but this is actually based on Arthur Miller's fictional account of the Salem witch hysteria from The Crucible in 1953, which is actually about the Hollywood Red Scare, but that's another story. So when you look at this, what you see is different colored circles of different sizes representing characters in the story who are semi-based on people who actually lived in Salem at this time. And you can see lines between them. So the circles are what we call the entities, or in this case, the node, that's N-O-D-E. And then the lines are the relationships. So if I hover over this, and let me go into full screen so you can see this a little better. If I click on Abigail Williams, I get a little bit of information. So she's the Reverend Paris's niece and ringleader of the accusers. And she has a type, accuser. And when I, let me just pan this up. When I click on her, I can also see the types of relationships she has. So she's friends with Mary Warren. She's the servant of Elizabeth Proctor, the friend of Beth Paris, the friend of Mercy Lewis, the friend of Ruth Putnam, the accuser of Tituba, the accuser of Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, and so on. And if I click on John Proctor, similarly, I will see that, and it's a little faint. I can't darken that, unfortunately. But you can see all of the different connections. And furthermore, oopsie, let me get back. Oops, let me pan back. This is interactive and responsive. So I can drag the nodes around to get a closer look. I can zoom in if I want to see closer what Ann Putnam's connections are. And I can actually count the connections. Let me turn on the legend so you can see. I can drag folks in and out of the screen to get a closer look. And I can completely reconfigure. So we can see here that Abigail Williams is really the center of this story. So I could actually move her right into the center of my screen, and I can keep reshaping this and really get a good look at things. And then I can reset it by just refreshing my browser to the original state that I set this to. So again, what we have is the nodes. These are the entities, in this case, people. They each have a type, in this case, either accuser, accused, bystander, or both accuser and accused in the case of Tituba, who was accused and then turned around and named names. And then these different kinds of relationships. I can scroll down and see a little bit of information about this visualization, which has its own unique URL. And I could even look at the data. So this is me looking at, this is what the data table actually looks like. So you see the node, the type, description, and then the links. And I will show you this on the back end in just a moment. As another and more complex example, I'm going to actually pull up this wonderful visualization of the characters in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing that our DH Center student assistant, Fabricio Licata Ramirez, who I failed to introduce at the beginning of this session, that he created. I'm going to pull this up, and then Fabricio, I'm going to invite you to talk a little bit about the visualization you created.
Thank you very much, Pam. Like Pam said, my name was Fabrizio. I go by he, him pronouns. And this project was sort of based on my love for film, specifically this movie, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. I watched it and I thought it was a fantastic movie. I think all the aspects of filmmaking are there. You have great characters, you have great dialogue. The actual filmmaking is there. But one thing that I really loved about it is that the movie is more about these characters interacting with each other, more than sort of like this overarching plot. So I have a whole load of characters here, and almost every character in the film interacts with each other in like these sort of isolated vignettes. And as you know, we run through different scenes. We see, for example, DeMayer having a moment with Mookie, and so they talk about something, and then Mookie goes off. They're very brief sort of moments that either takes It either happens in like 30 seconds. Some of the longer ones may take like about 3 minutes, but every character for the most part interacts with their other folks. And there is this sort of overarching theme of love and hatred. There's one character in particular named Radio Rahim who has these, Pam, I think if you bring up his, if you bring up his little, yeah, right there, that photo that's there. So he has these two sort of knuckle jewelry there. One says love and one says hate. And so he tells Mookie this story about the right hand and the left hand. And it's basically, he's giving an analogy of the battle between love and hatred. And how important it is that love triumphs over hate, or what it means when hate triumphs over love. And of course, this film is filled with a lot of sort of issues of race. There's also issues of police brutality and sort of what it means to love someone or to hate someone, and what that dynamic can tell about who we are as people. And I thought that love and hate was a little bit too binary, you know, just one or the other. So I wanted to sort of focus as well on the complex aspects of the film. Now, some of the relationships here might say neutral. Those are folks that either don't really interact with each other, or some are more complex, like Mookie and Jade. So Mookie is the character we focus most on in the film, and Jade is his sister. And they do have a very playful relationship for a majority of the film, but there is a sense that Jade is unhappy with Mookie because of the fact that he is not a very responsible person. He is kind of an absent father. He has a job, but he never shows up, or when he does, he's sort of playful about it. And Jade sort of, because of the fact that she cares about him, is really hard on Mookie, trying to get him to be a good father, trying to get him to make something of himself. And that's sort of one of those relationships that I thought were really interesting, because the sort of like the range of, oh, that there's isn't exactly complete love there, and there's not exactly a hatred, but there is sort of like an anxiety that comes through from these characters' conflicts and the way that they feel about each other. And how that comes through on screen. And I thought this was a really great way to visualize that, because Onodo isn't so much about timelines and tracking that, or at least I didn't track timelines in my project. But I really wanted to focus on sort of how these characters interact with each other. And under most of their descriptions, I put quite a lengthy bit of text going through every interaction. And I thought it was a great experience sort of going through and seeing how these characters mapped out, like mapping out sort of what was happening on screen. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So here you see two different examples. So one is taking is trying to visualize very complex relationships in a very complex film. And in my case, characters in a play that's loosely based on history. And we each had different motivations. So Fabricio was really interested in the sort of complexity of relationships, breaking away from a love-hate binary, even though that's the theme of one of the themes of the film. And what's really great about this is you get a really good sense. You could see how he's embedding images, both as the node and in the description. And then you can also see that Fabricio is using some of the extra features that we'll show you today, including you can see the number of relationships. So one of the really important things about the visual cues in any kind of network analysis is that the size of the node will indicate the number of relationships. So if you were to look at this, and let me make it a little bit bigger, what you're going to see is, you know, Mookie, it's a little hard to see here, but Mookie is one of the biggest, if not the biggest circle or node. That suggests he has the most connections. That's not surprising. He's the main character, played by Spike Lee. In my visualization, Abigail Williams is the central character of The Crucible, not necessarily the central historical figure of Salem, but Arthur Miller wanted to center her story. And so we can see at a glance that oftentimes with network visualizations, we can convey other information visually, including the strength of a relationship, which sometimes can be, which you can configure as the sort of thickness or darkness of the line, or that link. And we can also show directionality. to show sort of subject object. So who's acting upon who. We can add directionality to a visualization to convey that as well. Couple things to note about Onodo. As with a lot of free tools, there are limits to what we can customize. So we can't really customize the colors. They're basically assigned by the type based on the order in which you add the types. You can make all of your nodes a single color if you don't care about that level of visualization. And I can show you that as well. So, some of the more sophisticated network analysis tools out there can let you do a lot more customization, but you often need to know a little bit of coding, or you need to be able to structure your data in a particular way, or know a particular data structure language, such as extensible markup language or XML. With Onodo, you don't need any of that, and that's really wonderful. And I should add that part of the reason that Fabrizio made this visualization is that he actually made a really fantastic video tutorial about how to use Onodo. And he made this visualization to learn how to use Onodo and then featured it in the tutorial, which is linked on our TeachDH website. And so you can actually watch his video, look at his slides, read the transcript or the script of his tutorial to learn more about how he put that together. So with that, I'm going to dive into Onodo. This is the link. It's just onodo.org, and it's in English and in Spanish. So, it might default to Spanish language when you first arrive at the website. I'm already logged in, so this is what you would see. I'm logged in, so it already recognizes me. For those of you who've never used it before, you can go ahead and create a free account. You can use any email address that you want, but you won't be able to create visualizations until you do that. Once you're logged in, you can actually go into what's called your dashboard. And here you'll see, this is my witchcraft accusations visualization. And I can go in, and if I wanted to, I could click actions and actually edit this and keep changing it. I'm not going to do that on this one because I use it for demos, and so I don't want it to change too much. But I have these other test visualizations. When you first log in, you won't see anything in your dashboard. You'll just see, create a new visualization. There's a new feature called New Story, which I don't know what that is. There's no information about it on the website yet. And you can edit your various settings about your profile and things like that. Now, when you go to create your visualization, there's two ways you can do it. You can either have all of your data in a spreadsheet ready to go and load that in. And if you've used Onodo several times, you'll have a sense of how to structure your spreadsheet. If you want to do it that way and don't know how to structure your spreadsheet, it actually will give you a template, which I've actually already downloaded. And so let me pull that up really quickly. You should be able to see an Excel worksheet, perhaps, that has a couple lines of data. Oops, sorry about that. I'm trying to make it bigger. Can folks see that? Okay. So it's got name. It's got two worksheets. The nodes, those are the circles, and the relationships are the links. So it's got Anakin Skywalker, and hopefully there's no spoiler alerts here. There's Sith, Luke Skywalker, who's a Jedi, and then a little description. You'll see as well a little bit of what's called HTML or hypertext markup language. That strong is bold, and then you might see, I think this one has, let me just make that a little smaller. It has a little bit of HTML, an Ahref hypertext link out to wikia.com. So you can actually do that, and I'll show you how to do that as well. And then it's got the relations. So let me make that just a hair bigger. So again, if you've never seen Star Wars, cover your ears right now. Okay, so it's got Anakin Skywalker, father of Luke Skywalker. And then it's got a direction. So it's pointing to Luke. So if you weren't sure how to structure your data, what you could actually do is download this. You could even upload it into Onodo to see what it looks like and then copy that. And this is actually how I made sense of structuring the data. I generally just go in and start typing my data into Onodo. But a couple things to note here before we do that. One is, as with every kind of DH tool that we ever recommend, you want to maybe do that work outside of the tool, just in case you have your website crash, your internet crashes, or anything like that. So whether you want to use the Excel spreadsheet or not, you want to think about sort of mapping that all out in a Google Doc or a Word doc or whatever. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's limits to what you can visualize. So going back to mine, there's any number of historical explanations for Salem. So there's the gender thesis, that it was certain types of accusers, certain types of accused based on gender analysis. Others did economic analyses. Others did spatial analyses. Any number of things that we could look at. Onodo doesn't let me get at all of the facets of my data, just a couple variables. So it's a matter of sort of figuring out, what is it I'm trying to visualize and why? Do I have a specific question in mind? Am I trying to see something to help fuel my research? And so we have to sort of pick a particular set of things that we can look at. So I chose to look at relationships of people, trying to correlate that to accusations. And when I first started working on this, I actually had it inverted. So I wanted originally people to be identified as like a type, like sister, friend, something like that. And then the links would be the accusations. But I realized people have multiple relationships to one another, right? So I can be both a sister and a daughter and a friend. So I had to pick one type for each node. They could have multiple linkages. And so that helped me. I started working on the visualization and then realized I had it flipped and I had to do it over again. So I always recommend that you start out, you try to sort of answer the big questions of like, what is it you're trying to do and why? Then start to sort of figure out how that data would look, give it a test run with just a small subset of what you've got, see if it works. If not, iterate over that. To that end, because these tools are not intelligent, which is to say they're not doing, there's no artificial intelligence and no AI technology behind them, they only know what you put into them. So it's really important that you have identified a set of types and a set of types of relationships, and that you have what we would call a controlled vocabulary. Because if you are using person types and you say sibling, and then you say brother, and you use them interchangeably, we as human beings understand that they're synonyms, that brother is a type of sibling, but Onodo will not, and will treat them as two separate entity types. So it's important to sort of be consistent in the language that you're using as you structure your visualizations. Any questions about that before I dive into the actual demo? And while I'm doing that, I'm going to pull up the data. This is actually the data from my Salem, my Crucible visualization. So I have 17 nodes from Abigail Williams down to Tituba, and this is alphabetized by first name, and then the type. I didn't put a big description in because that wasn't really what I was trying to do in this demo. And then in the relations, what you'll see is there's 31 relationships among the 17 people, because every relationship needs to be manually entered into the system in order to create that link. So if we look at this, we'll see that Abigail Williams is the source, that is sort of the actor upon 6 relationships, but she's also the target for several. So for instance, she is listed as the friend of Betty Paris, and then the friend of Ruth Putnam, and the friend of Mercy Lewis. Now I could have had her be the source for everything and be the friend of Mercy Lewis. And the way to think about the relations is to think about it as a sentence. So the source is the type of the target. Abigail Williams is the servant of Elizabeth Proctor. I could have said that Elizabeth Proctor is the employer of Abigail Williams. The reason I wanted Abigail Williams as the source is because I already knew she was the center of the story. Now, if I hadn't known that, I might have made her the target more often than the source. She still would have had the same number of connections, and she still would have been a very big node. She just would have been, she would have been acted upon more than than doing the action, a sort of subject-object kind of relationship. And again, my data set is much simpler than Fabrizio's. Okay, so let me dive in. And so here, when you go to create a new visualization, you would give it a title. And again, you can begin with an empty table, or you can upload your data file. So I'm going to just type in a thing. And when I go to create, what I'm going to see is there's nothing here. I have to scroll down to this yellow bar, and here is the start of my table, but it's empty. So I like to start with nodes. I like to get a few nodes on the table and then start creating the links. So I could create a node Ginny, my senior pup. And maybe that's the type. So I'll say senior pup. I can add a description. Oops. I could embed an image if I want to. I want to make her visible. And if I want to add an image, I could just go in and browse my images and find a really cute one of Ginny. Actually, I've got even cuter ones. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but kind of have to go down this rabbit hole. Okay. Or I could choose it from the internet. I'm not sure if that actually worked. Nope. Try that one more time. The images are constrained in size, so that might be the one issue. My image might be too big, but that's a 2 meg. Okay, for some reason it's not working right now. We'll just pretend it did. Okay, so let's say I do that, and then I want to create another node. This is my puppy. And you'll notice that there's some autocomplete happening or auto suggestion happening. So that's going to help me be consistent as I'm entering the data. Okay. Okay. So now I've got 2 nodes, and you'll see they have 2 different colors, Ginny blue because she was the first type, the senior pup, and yellow for Pablo because he's the second type. If I go to add another senior pup, Yama, now I don't have to type all of that. Except I can't type live. And I can do that. Now I've got 3, and you'll see Ginny and Yama are both blue because they're both senior pups. Pablo is yellow because he's a puppy. Okay, let's see what this looks like on the other side.
Pam, sorry that I interject.
No, not at all.
This is like a perfect example of sort of the program choosing the colors for you. And this is one of the things that I struggled with a little bit. Sort of, you kind of just have to work with what you got. And if you use images for the nodes, then that sort of takes away the problem. But if the nodes are, if you're not going to use images, then you kind of do have to deal with the blue and the yellow. But
there is one way to change that, and I will show that in the settings, but then they would all have the same color. So right, your options are you use the predefined colors, and it's ordered based on the ordering of the types, that just the way you enter the data, or you put images in. And remind me, Fabrizio, how do you customize the image being used as the node?
So putting the in sort of right there where you'd originally tried to use it in the image box there, putting an image in there should work. But there is that issue again of the size. It has to be less than 2 meg. And that'll be the image that shows up in the node, on the node itself. Once you go into the description, you can actually put images in the description that won't show up on the node, but will show up when you access the node, when you access the description.
Yeah, and that would be, you'd have to basically link out to something that lives on the web. So I would have to grab an image URL, and I could do that really quickly. Give me 1 second to do that. Nope. I have a bunch of test pictures here. So for instance, I don't know who this is. All right, that's Ginny. So I can get the link. This may or may not work with Google. I actually haven't tried that. Make sure it's actually on Ginny. I don't know if that is actually working. I probably have to use embed code, the image SRC embed code, but on the fly, I'll just make a mistake doing that with HTML. At any rate, yeah. And as you see, I can actually move these guys apart so I can see it a little bit better. And you can constantly manipulate your palette, the way the nodes appear, and then you can lock it when you're happy with the design. Let's go over to, oh, I should also add, we can add custom columns. And Fabrizio actually did that in his. So he had all these custom columns. And if I scroll down to look at the data, I'll see he added ethnicity and whether they engaged in profanity in the film or not, and then the number of relationships. So I could do that as well if I wanted to. I could give it a custom column name. I can do a string. String is just text, a number, or the Boolean, which in this case is either true, false. I'm not going to do that right now, though. Then I can go ahead and create links by going on the link tab and adding a link. And in this case, I can only choose from the existing nodes. So Ginny, Pablo, or Yama. And I can create the target, Pablo. And I could say, Ginny is the big sister of Pablo Socks. Then I can add another one. Yama is the big sister of Ginny. And now what you can see is that there are two connections. And what's really lovely about this is that you can see it on the fly. So as you're building your data, you can see if it's working. And so this way you can sort of try it on a test set, see if it makes sense. If not, you can fiddle with it. And then I can say, Pablo Socks never met Yama, which is very sad. They would have loved each other. So now I can build multiple connections. There's not enough data here to see any kind of complexity. If I realize that that's not actually what I want to be visualizing, I can get rid of it. And another thing to note, let's go back into this test. I can also have clusters that are not connected. So you might have a bunch of data of different groups of things or people that are connected to each other, maybe not connected to the whole. So you can do that, right? So here's this cluster of person 7, person 8, and 6. They're independent from 3, 4, 2, 1, and 5. And here you can see I've played with the thickness of the line, and I've created directionality in some cases. So person 1 is the spouse of person 4 and the parent of person 2. So again, you're going to have to create all of those relationships manually, which, yeah, if you're working with a lot of data, is going to take a while. And I can only hazard a guess as to how long it took Fabrizio to build the Do the Right Thing visualization. But with something like this, unless you have a prepackaged data set that works for network visualization that you can put into this format, you're going to have to build it from scratch.
That's one of the cool things that I really like about this, is that since it's so flexible, you can really go as specific or as a standard as you want. I was really passionate about the movie and I went a little bit overboard, but I was happy with the project when it was done. So it really allows for usability of the user.
For sure, yeah. And again, it's going to depend on what it is you're trying to do with your visualization, what you're trying to visualize, what you're trying to analyze. On that note, I want to show you some of the extra features under the actions. So at any time, whenever you're ready, you can publish. Until you publish, no one else will, you won't be able to share out that visualization. I can also unpublish if I realize that I've made a mistake or something like that. And I can go and edit at any time. And in particular, there's a couple of settings here. So in this case, I can say that I want, typically the default is that the node color, that's the color of the circle, is based on some sort of qualitative information. If I wanted to make it, say, quantitative, this is how they would all be the same color because I don't have any quantitative information in my data set. And I wish there was a way, it looks like you should be able to pick on a color gradient, but for whatever reason, you can't. So quantitative is if you don't need to differentiate the colors of your nodes, and that would be based on some quantitative information in one of your custom columns. Or it might just be solely based on the number of relationships. And then we're just looking at size. Whereas if I do qualitative, I've got size of the node and color as two visual cues. And again, I can say, based on any number of things. So right now I have my node based on the type. So in this case, the type is parent, child, or sibling. But I could also, I've done what's called a network analysis to measure the connections, the clusters, to measure the strength of those relationships. And if I wanted to, I could change the colors based on the clustering, the relevance, and I don't really have enough data in here to be able to do this in a meaningful way. But these are all sort of ways that we can engage with network analysis, measuring the sort of strength between nodes. I don't know even how Onodo is defining relevance in this case, so don't quote me on that. The clusters, again, right? So this has 5. So we have sort of a couple different clusters here happening. There's coreness. I'm not entirely sure what they mean by that, in all honesty, but I could change all of this. I think cluster is a really interesting one. So one cluster is blue and one cluster is yellow. Again, if I want to do type, that changes the color, but it's always going to be blue, yellow, green. There's always like a very specific order to how colors are assigned. So if you're thinking about your visualization, and you might want to think about the order in which you're entering your data, that's the only way we can control color from the preset colors. Then node size, I can change. If you want them all to be the same size, you can. I like to do, and it's a good visual cue to do based on the column, because that's then showing me strength of how many connections there are, right? So person 8 only has this one connection. 6 only has 1. 7 is a slightly bigger node because that has 2 connections. So these are sort of adding the visual cues to help someone visually process this analysis, this visualization rather, and begin to ask better, more focused questions of the data. You can turn the node labels on or off. If you don't need the node labels, you can turn them off. You can turn off the node images if you don't need them and you only want them to show up in the description. It's always a good idea to show your legend. You never really want to turn that off. Similarly, you can customize your links based on the column is typical. Now, if I do normal, you'll notice that there's sort of similar line thickness. If you want to base it on a column, I can base it on a column, and in this case, strength. Strength is the number of links, right? So this way I can see 5 is the biggest number for person 1, and person 1 has the most has the most links. Thus, these are thicker, stronger stronger. And in all honesty, I'm not entirely even sure how it's defining strength here. I will say in my InfoVis class, I really struggled with network visualizations and did not do well on that unit of the class. I can change my line style as well. In terms of creating the arrow, I can do that by, where is that? It's usually here. Let me go to my other one. By adding direction. So I've now created an arrow source to target. So you'll see Yama is going to Ginny because Yama is the source, Ginny is the target. And I can't do it the other way around. So if that relationship of source to target matters and you want to show that directionality, that's why the source and the target would matter in this case. And again, that's going to depend on what it is you're trying to visualize. Then you can play around with the link distance and the link strength. I like more distance to better visually process. But if you have a lot of nodes, you're going to need to play around with your distance and strength, right? So in Fabrizio's here, we've got, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head how many nodes you have, 30, 40, something like that. You know, this would be a case where you'd want to think about how to show them on the palette so that you're not overloading someone visually.
And one of the things that I struggled with was because so many characters do interact with each other, it's not as clean as the witchcraft one where it's sort of, you know, a few relationships and you can kind of drag it around. Here, it kind of looks like a very complex spider web with all these lines shooting out all over the place. So when I tried to, when I actually set it in place before I published it, I actually tried putting some of the bigger characters with the more relationships on the outskirts or in the very middle to sort of show that these are places where you probably want to start. For example, Demeyer, Mookie, Radio Rahim were all on the outskirts and Sal was in the middle. These are sort of the bigger players in our movie. And sort of that was one of the ways that I interpreted, oh, maybe this would be a good way to show people this is where to start, or at least just to make it a little less congested, because there is a lot of stuff going on there visually.
Yeah. And generally with network visualizations, they tend to be there tend to be a lot of nodes and a lot of links, and a very complex one will have multiple clusters. So years ago, I worked with a DH postdoc back east in the DH lab I ran there. And he studied, he went through journals and letters of folks who helped hide Jewish people during World War II, during the Holocaust. So these were people who risked their own lives to help Jews escape the concentration camps. And he, based on all the archival data that he read, he created a network visualization and suddenly realized, because he was wondering how it was that people found each other in these networks. And what he found was he had these very complex visualizations, but he found that there was typically a trusted person would send someone to their friend. So there was always one level of removal between the person hiding the Jewish person and the actual Jewish person trying to escape. But it was built based on these networks of trust, and these networks would pop up and then disappear quickly. So what he would see is he would see like over time, different clusters popping up and disappearing. So he had hundreds of people that he was visualizing and over, 4 or 5 years. And so it was a very complex set of data. I can't remember if he added animation to it, but he was trying to do some very complex analysis that he couldn't have seen these connections if he hadn't done that visualization. So, in the case of me and Fabrizio, we were visualizing things that we were sort of familiar with and kind of knew the story of. And in the case of this postdoc, Martin, he was trying to answer questions that he couldn't answer just by reading archival material. So there's any number of reasons why we might want to do this. Just a few more things to show. So once you've done all your settings, then what you can do is, once you're comfortable with sort of the configuration on the screen, you can actually freeze it by either fixing or unfixing the nodes. Oops. So I can put them into a position, whatever one that is. Let's say this is what I want people to see when they first land. Oops, and that one got too far away. Let's say this is how I want people to see the visualization. I can fix it. And that means that people can still manipulate the visualization, but anytime they first come to the project or they refresh, they'll always come back to this view. And then when I'm ready, I will publish it. I'm not going to do that today because this is not a visualization I want anyone to ever see. But I did actually do that with, oh dear, where is it? My Crucible. And in this case, I could unpublish it if I wanted to. So if you've been following along and creating your own visualization, you would have to publish it for us to see it today. And then you could immediately unpublish it as soon as we're done. And so like, Evan, I'm not sure if you've been actually, oh, did we lose Evan? We might have. If Evan had been creating one along, he would have had to have published it and then he could unpublish it. Any questions about that? And Fabrizio, did I forget anything? There's a lot here.
No, you were very thorough, I think. I think sort of going into the really technical aspects about it, like when you pulled up the settings, sort of the advanced settings. I think things like line thickness and or sort of, you know, all those little aspects that might be very useful for some folks who really want to differentiate between certain relationships. For example, just because the nodes grow in size doesn't mean the lines themselves that dictate the relationships grow in size. So I think that a lot of folks, if they want to sort of dictate that this is a strong relationship, could make the line thicker, or if it's a weak relationship, make the line sort of thinner. I think that was a really good thing to bring up there. And yeah, it's the biggest thing for me was that it doesn't really show like the passage of time, but you can sort of fix that by working through the descriptions. And I think it's a great way to visualize.
Yeah, thank you. And that was one of the things I tried here is you can in your node label or node name add different things to sort of work around the fact that you only have a few variables that you can play with. So here I was sort of imagining what would happen if I wanted to put time in. So here, this was me trying to visualize a genealogy and try to add time into it when there was no other place for that. There was one other thing I wanted to note, which is that, you know, you can fiddle around and you can always sort of reset the defaults if you do something and you're not happy with it. Likewise, if you want to perform what's called a network analysis, you can do that by looking at clusters. And here's where it defines them. So clusters is the groups of nodes, the number of connections, that's definitely a good thing. Relevance, based on its number of connections and the relevance of nodes. In this case, that's not a meaningful network analysis for me. I don't have that information in here. I'm going to turn that one off. Betweenness is how many times a node is located along the shortest path between two nodes. That for me is also irrelevant because I'm shaping my analysis, my visualization based on aesthetics and not on anything more meaningful than that. So I can toggle that off. Closeness, similarly, I don't care about. Coreness indicates the layer of the network a node belongs to. This is a sort of analytical thing that for people who do network analysis, this means something. In this case, in this context, it doesn't. So I will turn that off as well. And I can perform a new network analysis that I can then use in configuring, for instance, the node size or the link based on strength. It actually, I don't have enough data here to change anything really, but I can see the number of connections, the clusters. Relevance again is based on, you know, how many nodes and sort of again, it's meaningless here because there's not enough data, but that would be used if I was trying to figure out like, okay, here's someone who's really the central person in the community, and there's some relevance there. There's some importance to all of these other mathematical numbers that that are being calculated on the back end. With really sophisticated network visualizations and network analysis, we would need these tools to measure all sorts of different aspects of the data. This is too simple a visualization to be able to do that. And I'm not enough of an expert in some of those calculations to be able to really thoughtfully explain them, but you can always sort of redo them and customize them. Another really awesome thing that you can do is you can download your data. Really critical that when you're done or as you're building it, that you download your data. It's a great backup, right? So that if something happens, if Onodo crashes, if your browser crashes, you can sort of pick up where you left off. And so in that case, I can actually do that. Let me get back to Witchcraft here. Where is that? Oh, so I can edit from here or from view data table, and then I can download it. And I believe I can do that on any of these. So I can download Fabrizio's data as well. So really good idea to be able to download, just as an Excel file, your data. Keep in mind, you have to keep it as an Excel file. If you try to convert it to a CSV, which is a far more stable format, CSVs, when you have multiple worksheets in an Excel file, CSVs can only save one worksheet. So in that case, you would need to split the spreadsheet in into two worksheets to save each as a CSV flat file. You know, if you were worried about Excel disappearing tomorrow, you would do that. But Excel is not really going to be going away anytime soon. So we don't really have to worry about that. Okay, any questions about any of that? Oh, and before I forget, sorry, I wanted to just point out we have lots of resources, including a step-by-step guide and Fabrizio's amazing Onodo tutorial. It is worth I think it's like 20 minutes long. It is worth watching. It is fantastic. You can also see some of the student projects that we did in that witchcraft class. And if you want to step up your network visualization game, there's lots of other tools here. Now, I will say that Gephi is the leader in network analysis. Gephi was the tool I could not figure out how to use in library school. Back in the day, as I recall, you could only structure your data as XML or extensible markup language. I think it's a little bit more flexible now, or else I just didn't know how to use it back then. But there's also these other tools like Cytoscape, Graph Commons. NodeXL is a way to do a network analysis in just your own Excel file. So it's another sort of good way to get started. It's basically a plugin for Excel. I'm not 100% sure if it works on Mac and Windows. Oftentimes these things only work on Windows. So Gephi is will perform the most complex, sophisticated analyses. It's maybe not a place to start, but if you're trying to do really sophisticated analyses or know someone who's trying to, that would be the thing to work up towards. Again, Onodo is a great tool for understanding conceptually how network visualizations work and how you can start building one without having to know data structures and things like that. And that's part of why I like it. And it's a great teaching tool because you don't need to get into all of that technical data structure stuff for students to be able to start using it. So I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any questions. Yes, Pam.
I think I have two. I'm
Perfect.
Still wrapping my mind around all this. Does it have to be an Excel spreadsheet? Will Google Sheets work? Or does that put like funky code into it that might not upload?
That is a really good question. Let's see.
I mean, it's not critical. I can still download a Google Sheet that we collaborate on and then make it into an Excel and upload it.
This specifies XLSX. So
Okay.
my guess is that, but the great thing is, and I typically work in Google, there's a download to Excel format. So work in Google, do what you need to do. You can download it into Excel, upload it into Onodo, see how it works, go back to your Google spreadsheet, do it all over again.
Okay. And then the second question I had, I was playing with it while we were talking.
Awesome.
And building a thing just to test it out. And
if you want to share that with us, feel free.
Oh, sure. Do I have share screen?
Oh, well, you can put the
Oh, I don't
no.
know. What do I
Let
do?
me give you share screen capabilities. There you go.
Okay, so I'm working on a grant project with Luke, who's actually here as well. And we're going to be like looking at a librarian network analysis to see where librarians and comic scholars intersect. So I'm just spitballing ideas on here right now. But one of the questions, so this is kind of cool. You can see like who's a grant advisor, who's working, who's presented at this conference. But some of the things we might want to capture on the nodes, for example, you had to add a custom column, geographic region. Is there a way that I'm going to be able to visualize that without adding links for everything, or like we would have to like link that somehow, or is that what the network analysis would do? It comes up blank when I click on it.
When you say visualize the geographic region, what do you mean by that?
Like, can I say, who are the other people doing stuff with comics in Southern California and be able to see that?
The only thing I think you can do is when you are looking at the live visualization, you can do a search node. I don't know whether it will search the custom columns, but let's try it on Fabrizio's because I don't have any custom columns.
Okay.
So for me, if I search, let me go back to screen share. So if I'm doing this, I could share, sorry, can you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
I can search, let me just make sure I have the nomenclature correct. Let's say I want to do ethnicity. Will it let me do this? No.
Okay.
So it only does based on the node name.
Okay.
So in this case, in your case, this is one of the things where this tool might not be enough for you.
Okay.
There are, other tools, and in this case, something even like Tableau might be a thing where because you need to have you want to visualize geography or at least search by. You need something where you can search on any of the custom columns.
Right.
And so Onodo might be too simple a tool for you, but you wouldn't have known that had you not played around with it.
Exactly. This has been fun.
And it was, that was your first question, right?
That was my second one. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Excel spreadsheet was the other.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you.
I have no memory left. So 5 minutes later, I'm like, what did you ask?
I don't remember what I asked 3 times.
Any other questions? I see we're just over time and I want to be mindful of folks' time. I can also stop the recording and stick around a little longer for other questions. I do want to be mindful of everybody's time. I did remember, I forgot to do this last time. If you can take a couple minutes just to provide us some workshop feedback on this refresher, which is not a formal workshop, but we're just using our workshop feedback form. That will really help me and also give me ideas for the future workshop series we might do in the spring or next year. But if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. I just want to thank you all for joining us on another Friday. We've got one more tool refresher coming up in November with Voyant for text analysis, and Fabrizio will be joining me again to show off all of the fantastic tutorials he's been creating with Voyant to really power it up. We'll be recording that. We'll put it up on the the DH at SDSU YouTube channel. It'll be up on TeachDH, all the normal ways that you would find it. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep chugging along with your semesters, and we'll hope to see you back here again.
Thank you both.